Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Georgianna Shea. Dr. Shea, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. I was telling you this off air, but I've been following your online presence and your activity and your articles you're contributing to and publications and so I'm excited to chat with you today. But for folks that haven't been following you and don't know much about you, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. So my background's been in computer science, cybersecurity, computer operations for, I guess, over the past 25 years. Primarily, I'd say in the defense industrial base area. So a lot of support to DoD. But then I made a switch about going on close to 4 years ago and went to the think tank space. So it's been very exciting because now I get to work on the projects that I want to work on, those things that everyone out there as a practitioner sees and says, why isn't this being fixed? Or this is an issue. How come no one's dealing with this? So now I get to do those kind of things. And I don't have a sponsor hovering over me, like with, this is what we're going to work on. We don't have time for the other stuff. So it's been very exciting.
Yeah, very cool. I know, we were chatting off air before we went online here, asked about RSA, and you say you're actually heading off to Paris for a space cybersecurity event. So that sounds so much cooler, and I'm definitely envious of you. So I was going to ask, I saw your name pop up on this report, and for folks that haven't read it yet, it's called The Strategy for Cyber Physical Resilience, Fortifying Our Critical Infrastructure for a Digital World. So I was curious, how did, the report come about and your involvement in it? Just curious the background of, before we dive into any specifics of the report, but just kind of the background on the report.
Yeah, so the report is put out by the PCAST, and the PCAST is the Presidential Council of Advisors for Science and Technology, PCAST. It's a group of I'd say the country's top science and technology folks that work on various issues. I am not a member of the PCAST, but they did invite me to the PCAST working group on this particular topic, cyber physical systems. So I just want to make that distinction. I mean, they do cyber physical systems, they do AI, there's medical pieces they do as well. But this particular project focuses on resilience of cyber physical systems. It was being led by Phil Venables, the CISO over at Google, and Eric Horvitz, who's the Chief Scientific Officer at Microsoft. My involvement in the way I got to this, I had been introduced to Eric, I guess, earlier in the year on some artificial intelligence work he had done. And I assume it's because I provided him a lot of feedback on the paper. He'd give me a paper to go through and review. I made some comments, and then he reached out to me. Actually, the PCAST reached out to me months later and invited me to be part of the working group. So I say that because the power of networking is very important. And then I do send out a lot of work. Other people send out a lot of work. Like, can you look at this for me? Can you give me your 2 cents? And I deeply appreciate it when someone does give me feedback on something. So you never know where it's going to lead. So for me, it led to actually being on the working group, and I was very excited about it.
Yes, actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking how spot on that is because I've actually seen your name in some emails of folks reaching out to kind of ask for those, types of feedback for other publications or outlets, and I've seen your name. And I was, when you said that, I was just thinking it's so true. You never know where it will lead, right? If you take some time to provide some feedback or help someone out, you never know what they may do later. They may call on you later or give you an opportunity later of some sort. Obviously, we didn't plan to talk about networking, but I think you're spot on in that regard. So I was going to ask you too. Some may be asking, what's the big deal, right? It's software. What's the worst that could happen? Like people who aren't deep in this space and don't understand like the interconnection or interdependency between software and the physical world and the increasing, cyber physical systems we see now. Can you kind of elaborate on that risk and why we should be paying attention to this problem?
Yeah, you really have to look at it holistically, and I guess people approach it from the different sectors that they come from. But the extreme view of it, why is this so important? If you don't have cyber physical systems resilience, then it's a world of doom and gloom and death and despair, because everything is so interconnected by our IT systems, by our software. So like I said before, I kind of came out of the defense industrial base. So I think I was a little spoiled there working with DoD because you have a lot of, you have a policy for everything. You have a belly button for everything. You've got a person, you've got a regulation. You got a lot of funding. Congress kind of hands them, here's a bucket full of money. So if there's a cyber issue, you get to pour money into the cyber issues. But when you step out of that sector of critical infrastructure, you're now into the water sector, you're in the energy sector, you're in the manufacturing sector, the healthcare sector, and they don't have those same kind of what is the word? I'd say large group community involvement, policies, direction, funding, resources. So we do heavily rely on our systems for our water. So if the water goes down, okay, you don't get water in your town for however many days until it gets fixed. And when you look at the resources behind the water facilities and the organizations, it might be one person. And unlike DoD, you don't have, oh, we'll just contact Cyber Command. Like, no, you have no one else to contact. So it's kind of on them. Other organizations, their critical infrastructure is primarily owned and operated by the commercial sector. So it's then private business that sometimes don't want to share information. Sometimes they do want to share information, but it becomes a competitive issue, becomes a compliance issue. And again, they don't have the resources that some of those larger government organizations have. So it's interesting to see the differences across all of the critical sectors, all the sectors of critical infrastructure. And the baseline is they all require that resilience in order for us to maintain our daily lives, which is why they're deemed sectors under critical infrastructure. So
yeah,
I think that was a pretty long answer, but
no, it's a great way to put it. You know,
yeah.
What's funny is I can't remember the name of the movie, and I'm sure you probably experienced this as well. But working in cybersecurity, like some friends that are not in cyber that I have, recently watched like a movie. I think it was in the last 6 months or so on Netflix. I think it was about.
It was the Netflix movie.
Yes, and all of a sudden I got a lot of messages saying like, "Is this real? Could this happen? Like, is this?" And I'm like, "Yes, like this is a real risk that we need to be concerned about." And it's not just like getting the water or getting the electricity. It's like all those peripheral, tangential things that could happen, like societal chaos and things getting pretty crazy if people don't have these critical infrastructure services that they depend on. And I wanted to talk to you about, you talked about like the software now powering everything from critical infrastructure to weapon systems, things like that. So the report makes some key recommendations on how to fortify. It says fortify the resilience of the nation's critical infrastructure. What were some of the key recommendations or themes, that people should be taking away from the report if they were to dig in?
Oh, well, for software, we specifically mentioned software and the use of software bill of materials under, I think it was recommendation 4, promote supply chain and resilience by design. So the SBOM is specifically mentioned being able to replicate your software, understanding what's in your software. Software is really the lifeblood of our infrastructure. Everyone uses it. Everyone looks at it. It's interesting because we're getting into this resilience aspect, and I come from a test and evaluation background. So before I was with FDD, Foundations for Defense of Democracies, which is a think tank in DC, I was a chief engineer at MITRE, and I was supporting the Office of Secretary of Defense, looking at the test and evaluation of our DoD systems. And DoD, just like a lot of other organizations and other sectors of critical infrastructure, focus on compliance. So you can look at the compliance of your software. Is it meeting the requirements, your RMF, your HIPAA, whatever you're looking at? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be resilient. So this project and the software specifically was really kind of getting towards not just meeting the compliance piece, but that you are resilient and you can continue with the mission assurance, whatever your purpose is, whatever that function is, that it'll be completed regardless of issues. And so that really starts with knowing that you have securely developed software. So I mentioned software bill of materials. One of the projects I had done, I guess a couple of years ago now, that I'm a very big software bill of materials promoter. You can look at it and you can see, okay, there's different components of software within the larger software package that you're getting, but you can start to dig into those components and then look at who wrote the software, where did it come from, are there indications of risk within the software, not even if it's a CVE, because that's going to have to be a identified piece of code that you looked at, you analyzed, you found the vulnerability. So I think people sometimes miss out and forget that that's the found vulnerability. That means there's also unfound vulnerabilities. So look at how it's developed, look at those indications of risk and know, okay, where am I going with this software? Is this going to be put into a weapon system? Is this going to be put into the Netflix box in front of the Walgreens? Like, can I accept the risk? Can I not accept the risk? So yeah, we do look at software in the report and try to promote that design and build with security.
Yeah, you're kind of speaking my language now because I dug deep on the software supply chain piece, and did publish a book on the topic last year. And obviously, SBOM is a big piece of that. And I think we've all, as a society, came to this realization like software powers everything, not just the critical infrastructure, but our business systems, everything we can think of. And like we don't know what the hell's in it a lot of the time. And like we kind of take it for granted. And like just like you pointed out, like it's one thing to look at kind of a lagging indicator of risk, like a known vulnerability, for example, a CVE, but there's leading indicators of risk. How many people are maintaining it? Where are they from? Like how often are they remediating issues or responding to issues or concerns from people who use the software? Those are all things we need to look at. And as folks probably saw recently with the XE utility scare. Known vulnerabilities are one thing, but there's something to be said about malicious maintainers and people trying to take over projects and insert backdoors. And there's a lot of things to be considered with. And then as you talk about, everything kind of exists on a spectrum of risk. If it's a Netflix box, as you put it, in front of the grocery store, the risk tolerance is going to look a lot different than if it's a critical national security weapon system, for example. So taking a look at that level of transparency is so critical. You talked about this earlier. You talked about how much of the critical infrastructure is often, privately owned and operated. I'm curious, like what kind of, constraints, challenges, or even opportunities, does that present if it's, not a situation where the government can't control everything and doesn't control everything? How do we navigate that, given that it is privately held and operated in many cases?
Yeah, we addressed that in the paper. We looked at if there is this doomsday kind of event where there's some type of national cyber attack or tornado or something that happens where there's some type of obstacle to the continued operations for an organization. The private sector, partnered with the government is really the best way to go about this. A public-private partnership so that the private sector understands the risks, they know how to mitigate the risk, they know what resources are available to them, and then the government then realizing that they don't have all the power. So if something does happen, they can't just act like a cyber command and say this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it, these are the resources that we have, and this is how we're allocating it. They're talking to CEOs of very large companies that might have other issues involved or other factors that they have to look at. So there has to be a public-private partnership where they understand how together they can go through and ensure the type of resilience in the face of some type of adverse event.
Yeah, I think something you said earlier that really jumped out to me is the emphasis around resilience. I loved it. Obviously, it's the name of the show here, so I'm a little biased, but I love the theme of resiliency because as you point out, like it's one thing to be compliant. We all know of SOC 2, FedRAMP, RMF, NIST, like you name it, right? There's compliance frameworks, but that doesn't mean impenetrable or infallible. Like there will be an incident of some sort. There will be a disruption. It's how you respond, recover, and kind of learn lessons from those incidents when they happen. Obviously, given that much of this is privately held, we likely will see some combination of private-public partnership, but also there's a space for regulation to play a part for these critical infrastructure entities. How do you see regulation playing a role? And then often, for example, knowing that they don't have the resources of the government, like you mentioned earlier, how do you kind of balance that regulatory push with also understanding constraints around expertise and financial constraints and some of the things that these critical infrastructure entities may have to juggle with? They can't just do all the things. They can't, even if they want to, for example.
Yeah, in the paper, we put in recommendations for ensuring that the sector risk management agencies are properly resourced with the right amount of skill, that the sector coordinating councils are also involving those senior executives from different companies so that they understand how to recover, what the bigger picture looks like. So people aren't just looking internally at their own organization, but how they fit into the ecosystem of everything within our critical infrastructure. So we, I guess, how do you do that? We made the recommendations for proper resourcing, and not so much on the regulation side, but on the policy side. I want to point out that I was very excited. The cybersecurity framework 2.0 that came out in February specifically mentions resilience. So people can start looking at some of those those frameworks out there to help ensure the resilience piece of their organization, because cybersecurity is different from resilience. When you look at cybersecurity, usually in a practitioner sense, it's okay, what does it mean in the 800-53? Like, what kind of controls are you putting in place here? So when I saw the new framework, I'm kind of moving towards that mindset of, don't just build it so it's secure, build it so that it continues to do what it's supposed to be doing, and you have that resilience. So that framework in there included one of the tasks of the subcategories was meets the requirements, your resilience requirements. And my first thought was, now people are going to ask, great, what are the resilience requirements? Because that's not really been a question people are asking. They've been asking the questions of, okay, are we meeting the controls requirements? Are we meeting the compliance requirements? And so when you get into resilience, just again, to kind of differentiate what the differences between the two, cybersecurity is ultimately the confidentiality, integrity, availability of your data. But resilience, again, is ensuring that you can complete the mission assurance. And there's other aspects that you can look at, like from an engineering standpoint, your FMEA approach, the failure mode effects analysis. So those don't necessarily equate to the NIST controls, catalog controls. It's more of, okay, how does the system work? How is it designed? How do you ensure, regardless of the obstacle out there, a cyber attack, a natural disaster, some type of mistake or whatever it is, that there is the redundancy built in, there is the backup capability, there is the understanding that your systems will continue regardless of whatever that challenge is.
Yeah, I like where you're emphasizing with the resilience piece and the kind of not 100% alignment with compliance, because it's one thing to say we did, the 123 controls or whatever, you pick your baseline, your framework, kind of thing, but you're talking about, the ability for like meantime to restoration, service level agreements, maybe the ability to kind of restore from a backup, these contingency plans that we need to put in place that are not just compliance, so you don't just fall back and say, well, we were compliant. But were you resilient, right? Is the thing we're after,
right.
These critical infrastructure services. Another thing the report mentioned and really emphasized that caught my attention is it calls out it specifically says, it emphasizes the need for industry, board, CEO, executive accountability. The reason that jumped out to me is we've seen a similar trend, right, with the SEC, the recent rules for SEC around like board involvement and awareness around cybersecurity risks. We've even seen CISA, put out their secure by design guidance with calls for, private sector organizations, leadership, CEOs, et cetera, to take more accountability for security outcomes for customers. Why do you think we're seeing this paradigm shift of, ensuring that leadership is on board? And then also, like, how do we ensure that we don't just have like leadership, kind of paying lip service to cybersecurity, but like it getting lost in translation between middle management and the people actually, doing the work in the organization?
I think there were a lot of questions in that statement. So let me see if I can go back. I don't remember what these were. So the board engagement. Why are we seeing this now? I think that people, not just cybersecurity experts, are starting to see in the news a lot more of how this is affecting them directly. The Colonial Pipeline. I think I saw in the news people putting gasoline in plastic Piggly Wiggly bags, and I'm like, oh. Cyber's reaching everyone at this point. They're starting to see, okay, this is an issue. I think a couple month and a half ago, there was the military pharmacy. My grandmother was having problems getting her own prescription. So people are starting to feel the effects of cyber attacks, cyber events, misconfigurations, just the interconnectedness of the systems with daily lives. So that, I think, is becoming much more prevalent. And I say that from someone who's been working in the field for, again, like over 25 years, where I would explain to people what I was doing before, and they're like, I don't know what you're doing. Now people know what I'm doing. Like it's a major in school. There's certifications. There's people trying to get into the field. There's kids in the STEM program that are, actively trying to pursue cybersecurity. Whereas, again, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ago, I don't know what you're talking about. Is this some sci-fi thing? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So boards are definitely becoming more aware of this. As you mentioned, the SEC ruling that was coming out before, and the focus on cyber savvy people being on the boards, that's been a topic. The SolarWinds incident, a lot of legal issues there. They're becoming much more aware of the ramifications, the legal piece of this. So the recommendation in the paper is that there's tone at the top matches the resource and the ranks, and I think that's actually how we wrote it in the paper. It sounds better when Phil says it because he has a nice English accent, so I'll just say tone at the top equals resource in the ranks. So that's understanding that what needs to be done is being resourced for, and that the executive level is really understanding that. I've had discussions in the past where it's focused on the CISO, like how is the CISO effectively communicating with the CEO, and you find that there's always that barrier of they're speaking technical jargon and they may not really understand what the impact is. So there's a big push to ensure that the decision makers, the executive suite, understands really what's going on, what their posture is. And it's not just a report that says, okay, we met the compliance piece. I think everyone knows, in the field, you can go through and you can be compliant and still be compromised tomorrow and then be bankrupt within a week, or have some mission failures. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're secure if you're compliant. It just means that you're meeting a baseline. And the adversary is always going to find an out-of-the-box way to, surprise everyone, surprise, and break in some other way. So it's an evolving field, and again, we're starting to see everyone's starting to see the importance of that, and we do cover it by addressing that uniform understanding of what the possibility is, and ensuring that people are resourced for it. I also want to just quickly say, I've been asked the question before, why is it different within different sectors or different industries? So I think it is important for people to understand there are the public versus private organizations, the government organizations, and a lot of these privately owned organizations, like your utility company might be privately owned. Your other services are maybe privately owned. Cybersecurity and some of these things that we're recommending, resilience, these become cost center factors for a lot of these organizations. So again, they don't have that huge bucket of congressional money that they hand to DoD to say, hey, go through and improve cybersecurity and make sure that every kink is worked out. They're making business decisions based on their boards, their performance, their funding, and in not all cases do they have those kind of funds to just sink into let's say a cyber kind of department where it's difficult to go through and measure how successful are you being. So if I'm the CEO and I gave you, let's just say $1 million last year to improve our posture, and you're coming to me again this year and you're saying, okay, now we need to go through and do this and I need another $1 million. The first question is going to be, well, what did the $1 million get me last year? You're like, it got you into the yellow phase of the red, yellow, green. You're like, okay, so what's this $1 million going to do for me? You're like, it's going to keep us in the yellow phase of the red, yellow, green. So it's a difficult area to go through and quantify and throw metrics to. But again, the information is flowing and people are starting to understand that a little bit better, that it is important.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges we've always historically had in cybersecurity, is like you're kind of trying to prove a negative, right? Like something bad didn't happen, or like when it did, we were at least semi-prepared to respond to it or address it. And so I guess I'll break up my other question, because I threw like 3 questions at you at once. The other piece was like, we're talking about response, recovery, things like that. We're also seeing a big push in the industry for secure by design software and systems, with CISA leading that charge. And I'm curious your perspective on that, given that, it is a cost center, like you said. We're asking people to slow down and put security on par, or at least in comparable consideration to things with like speed to market and revenue and return on investment and things like that. So how do we kind of push that without asking people to do things that are just simply impractical or financially infeasible sometimes?
Well, so it's not just the secure by design and the software. I'll just expand it to the entire system, whatever it is that system is that you're building. And one of our recommendations in the paper is to incorporate that cyber-informed engineering into the design phase of systems. I've seen a lot of systems. You have the system design requirements. So we need something to do A, B, and C, and then throw cybersecurity on top of it. Even a lot of the contracts I've seen within DoD says you're going to build this type of system and then make sure it's compliant with DoD 8500. You're like, okay, well, that's not really a requirement. Like specifically, how does it need to be designed? Because if not, you're going to build the thing so it does the stuff, A, B, and C, it functions the way it's supposed to, and then you're going to go back and you're going to put the controls on top of that. But if you move left and you actually design in the security so that you have your segmentation, so that you have your understanding of the impact of a cyber attack, then you can design it out so that it's not as devastating, possibly. So that's one of the areas that we focused on, that, not just build it in, but design it in.
That makes sense. I was going to ask you as well, like, given your, I know we're coming towards the end of the interview here, but you have a wide range of interest and involvement in various aspects of our industry. And we touched on this a little bit with the software supply chain piece, SBOM, things like that. What are some of the most concerning or interesting, things that you're keeping your eye on around software supply chain security in, say, the next 12 to 24 months that you kind of have your attention?
Well, first up, I know the SBOM community group just put out a new working email, so I'm excited about that. I haven't been able to attend the meeting, but I love to see the community, the SBOM community, is continuing to grow, and I'm also very excited to see SBOM requirements, creeping into some of the various policies and regulation out there. I think in November, the pre-market medical devices required the use of SBOM, so I was very excited about that. The operation, I'm going to mess up this one. Operationalizing SBOMs, I think, is really the next big milestone that I want to see. There's the requirements that you have them, but I want people to understand how you can actually use those. So within your organization, your company, when you get the SBOM, if you put it in a drawer, it's useless. Like, great, I got it. Yeah, I did a check. Okay, we're compliant. Wonderful. No, it's supposed to be a tool to help you, help the organization understand where their software is coming. So from that, they can go through and start, seeing what are those indications of risk, who wrote it. They can tie it to their other aspects, their procurement processes, their defensive cyber operations. Whenever the next Log4j comes up, do we have Log4j? Whatever that may be, their asset inventory piece of it. So, to see people actually start incorporating to the full extent, I think is, very exciting. I think that's on the horizon right now. It's being felt out. There's, different, I guess, recommendations, and people are struggling with it. There's different tools out there that are being used to incorporate those within companies. But when companies understand the value and the I guess the value SBOMs can bring to them to ensure they have that designed in process with secure software, that'll be fantastic.
Yeah, I like the recommendations there. It's like, we've seen SBOM get a lot of attention from CISA, NTIA before that, industry working groups like OWASP and Cyclone DX with OWASP and, SPDX with Linux Foundation and so on. But we don't want it to become a kind of compliance exercise. Like, yes, I have it. I dropped it in some, share drive somewhere. I never look at it. I haven't operationalized it in my cybersecurity supply chain risk management or acquisition processes and procurement and so on. So I'm excited to see how the industry flushes that out. And ultimately what they're getting towards is more transparency than we've had historically.
Right.
We talked about, this stuff powers everything, and we just haven't had good transparency historically, especially around open source in particular, of integrating into products or infrastructure and things like that. So that said, thank you so much. We ran quite the gamut of discussion there. So Dr. Shea, thank you for tuning in. Thanks to everyone who joined us today.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.